back to He's a Giant, a pod about the worst run organization in pro sports. I am your host, Sal, with my co-host, Monty, going over by popular demand, unfortunately, another episode of Why the Giants Suck. What's going on?
Honestly, I feel different than I did last.
I'll take this off. It's upsetting some people.
I feel different than I did that last year. I was listening to some of our episode last year, and I was angry. I was very angry when we started the show. And that anger has turned to apathy. And that's where I feel a lot of the Giants fan base has gotten to, where they just continually show no promise to our fans that anything is going to get better, and we continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. We'll get into all this, but I don't know about you. When I was kind of like preparing and reading like the articles we went over last year and listening to this, a lot of the shit that we were talking about last year and a lot of the shit they were talking about when we were firing Gettleman sounds a lot like right now. So
it's like, yeah, I mean, we just fast forward 1 year and it's like the exact same conversations we're having with literally the exact same results on the field, the exact same outcomes.
We were literally talking about keeping the GM and firing the head coach and like that same shit in the last episode. It's just fucking deja vu.
Yeah. I mean, so just a little recap. We've been doing our player profiles in terms of position groups, and we're down to just one. We were going to do the QB episode today and knock it out. But after, the Giants' victory against the Raiders, which, that wasn't too surprising to me. The Raiders are horrible, and they did a tank job of all tank jobs going into that game. But then, like, the news that came out this week, the reporting that has come out, starting with the Ian Rappaport, like, little sign on his NFL report on Sunday. He didn't even discuss it, but basically, specific wording saying Joe Schoen likely to remain with the Giants for the draft, for the NFL draft, whatever that means. And then Pat Leonard jumping on that later that day and, saying that he's hearing that Joe Schoen is likely to be back. And the next day saying that from league sources, he's hearing a quote, get ready to cover Joe Schoen for one more year. Jordan Raanan went on his show yesterday with Bobby Skinner and said essentially the same thing, that they expect Joe Schoen to likely be back from what they're hearing. Jordan Raanan's take on it was a little bit more, I thought, detailed. And what he said, he said that the reason he's getting that impression is because coaching candidates, assuming this is being heard through their agents, are not being told anything other than, hey, expect Joe Schoen to be the GM through the process in next year. Expect that. And I think the real dagger in that point was when he said, in speaking to agents who represent executives, and there are not a lot of them, there are very few agents who represent executives, there has been not one hint of the Giants doing any homework on any executives to this point, not so much as curiosity, nothing. So you start adding it all up, and unless you want to be in full denial, it's beginning to look like, at least until to the draft at minimum, Joe Schoen is likely staying. That's what their intention is, and that's where we are.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any different than that. I think that's what it sounds like their plan is right now. Reading back on the autopsy by Teller Dunn, we'll get in some quotes and things from that. At the time when he wrote that, they were talking about the idea of keeping Joe Judge and finding a new GM, and how messed up it is doing half measures, and how the Giants constantly do these half measures. And here we are again, worrying about the Giants doing half measures. Can the outrage of Giants fans and some help from guys like Steve Tisch cause them to do the right thing and fire Joe Schoen despite them not wanting to? It's possible, and I challenge all Giants fans and anyone listening to continue to push back and continue to let the Giants know how angry you are with this decision, how bad of a decision. I know, I know Bobby ran like his second poll in the last few weeks about, do you want to keep Joe Schoen? And it was like 96% wanted to get rid of him. That happened twice. It was almost the exact same numbers. I've never seen something so lopsided and like with these things. So, hopefully we can come together and do something like we did in 2022. But I mean, right now it sounds like Joe Schoen is here.
I think we have to assume that's happening, and I think we need to get into that. I will give you guys a little bit of a promo. I told Monte I would do this. Tomorrow I'll be guest on Big Blue Banter with Dan Schneier and Nick Filato, and I will be debating another person regarding the pros and cons of keeping Joe Schoen. I'm the cons. The other guy's the pros. I won't say who it is, but Dan and Nick will be moderating, which should be a fairly lively discussion or debate. So if you're interested, tune in. I think it's going to be around 11:30 a.m. or so, taking advantage of my days off here. So if you're interested, tune in for that. And while I have you guys and all your attention here, please make sure to like the episode on YouTube, subscribe, please, to YouTube. We're getting closer to 1,000 subscribers, so hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit like, share it on Twitter, Facebook, whatever you want to on your social media profile in terms of the links to the episode. And you can always follow us at He's a Giant Pod, me at Queens_guy, Monty at MONTECRI5TO. Just wanted to get that stuff out of the way. But let's get to this Joe Schoen stuff. So there's a couple of things I think that need to be acknowledged in this Joe Schoen discussion. One, the Maras have shown repeatedly that they could give a shit what their fan base / customers care about, right? Like they don't care about what their fans want. They don't care about outcomes. They don't care about production. They don't care about results. They believe they know better than everybody, including the scoreboard, and the records and the standings. And so they are pretty consistently stubborn and resistant to any reasonable thought process on this issue. So it's not surprising to me that they would just stick their thumb up at us and say, go to hell, we're going to do this. But there is another issue going on, Monty, and I think that has to be discussed, which is, and I'm only bringing it up because they keep sending out this information that they're hiding, essentially, and I'm going to use the word hiding, behind John Mara's health and saying, John Mara's sick, and that's why we might have to keep Joe Schoen. We don't want to upset him. We don't want to do too much work. God forbid we have somebody other than the guy with cancer running a $10 billion organization and making, executive decisions. God forbid. And our beautiful media members, by the way, except for like one or two of them, don't want to touch the third rail. We don't want to ask about it. Like, how is this okay? Oh, well, we don't want to upset John and his health. What? You're a fucking reporter.
Yeah.
Your job is to report, not to cozy up with John Mara and Pat Hanlon. That is not your job. Your job is to get the news, ask difficult questions. You're in sports journalism. You are not held to the standard of just reporting the facts. You are allowed to editorialize, and you should be asking reasonable questions. How is this okay? Who's making this decision? How is a record like this okay? What thought process is going into this? This is not happening. Our reporters don't want to touch it. They don't want to talk about it, but it's being leaked out that, hey, John Mara's health is why they don't want to do this. And John Mara, from wherever he's lying right now, is saying, no, keep Joe Schoen. Let's start there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'll lead off with, just before I get into it, it's just obviously both you and I, we don't want to see somebody going through this. It's obviously, cancer is a terrible fucking disease. All that's bad. I wish John the best. I hope he gets healthy. But you can say those things that I just said, and then also acknowledge the football side of this. And how is John Mara's health? How are they going to go from here if John isn't able to run this team? Why isn't that question being asked to them? And why are we just allowing them to give us this excuse that because John isn't healthy, that they can't do a GM search? I mean, that is a piss poor bullshit excuse, because it's not like they're like saying what they did last year, Sal. They're not sitting here and telling us, you know what? I believe in this guy. I know you guys don't, but I believe in God. That's not the messaging that's going out. The messaging that is going out is that they do not feel like they can run a head coach and a GM search given John Mara's health. This is a $10 billion organization. $10 billion. They can run a GM and a head coach search at the same time and figure out whatever succession plan they have for John Mara. I mean, they told us in September that this man had cancer, and I'm sure they knew well before then that he had cancer. They need to figure that the fuck out if they haven't already, and then need to move on and figure out this GM and head coach candidate. That's the reality of it. I know a lot of it's being floated out there. I'm not going to sit here, despite some of what I heard, and speculate on a man's health. But I also think it's bullshit that the reporters who have a lot more information than I do, and the other people who I talk to, who seem all to have the exact information that I'm hearing and haven't said a fucking word on it. All I'll say is I've heard it's really, really fucking bad. That's what I've heard. John Mara's health is really bad. I don't know. I'm not a reporter. The reporters should be figuring that the fuck out.
I think it's actually okay and completely reasonable to separate the two things. You can, as a normal human being, feel sympathy and empathy towards a man who has cancer and say, I hope your health improves. I hope you're not suffering. I hope things improve for you. And I genuinely feel bad for you and your family. Mm-hmm. And separate that from, why is this organization being run to shit and being allowed to run to shit? Is there nobody stepping up and saying the guy who has cancer and is apparently ill maybe shouldn't be used as a shield for bad decision making? Because either he's just making bad decisions and saying I can operate things and I'm competent and capable to do so, in which case he's honestly fair game, not for his health, but for his decision making to be criticized. Or the family is hiding behind it, or the Tisches are hiding behind it. Whatever, people in ownership are hiding behind this man, and I think that's pretty nasty, to be totally honest. Either say that he's too ill to operate the organization and let somebody else run it, and then that person step up and take heed for whatever decision is made, or just let the discussion flow. But the reporters who are not even touching this like it's a third rail are disgraceful. I'm sorry. I don't care if Pat Hanlon threatened you. Your job is to try to tell people what is happening. How is it okay that a team that is now 3-13 again is even considering running things back, leaving things alone, and being satisfied with the results? Their fans have a right to know, because at the same time that they're doing this bullshit, they're sending out messages to people to, hey, are you excited for week 18? You want to buy tickets for next year? They're doing their business side. They want people to spend money. Those customers have a right to ask, why should I spend my money? What the hell are you doing? And I think the reporters have an obligation to go out and actually get those answers. And they should ask some hard-hitting questions. It shouldn't be, we're not going to talk about this. It shouldn't be, we're not going to touch it because we're worried about offending a man who's sick. This happens in business all the time. People get ill at the top of organizations. And you know what they typically do? They hand things off to someone else so they can deal with their illness. And if they don't, what they're saying is, I can handle things. I'm fair game for any criticism or normal discussion. So why don't you treat it like that?
Yep. Yeah, that's a reality. If John is not healthy enough to run this team, then he should have stepped down and at least in the interim officially handed off the role to somebody else that's in the family. They don't have to make that the long-term decision. Maybe the person they hand it down to doesn't even want to do it the long term, but step up. This is a $10 billion organization and run this team. And if John is healthy enough and it is better than a lot of people are hearing, then you can run a goddamn GM search and do the head coach search, and just like you did 4 years ago. It's not this crazy thing to do to run both of those at the same time. I understand that the owner part is a big component here. If they got to figure out who is going to be the next president and CEO. I mean, to be honest, the Joe Schoen discussion becomes such like small potatoes in comparison to that. If that is a real thing where they are trying to find who it is, whether it's internal or external, and we can have that discussion, But we need answers here, man. We need somebody to start talking to us, because we heard this in September and we've gotten no updates from anyone. And I'm sure we will get some updates at the end of the season, because we basically have to, because either John Mayer is going to be talking to us or they're going to have to put out something, because he's not. So we're going to hear something soon, but it's embarrassing that we've heard nothing.
Now, a lot of the stuff that's being discussed regarding his health and what's going on with the GM position is speculation, bits and pieces of information that come out through random sources. Mm-hmm. What has been stated by people publicly, people like Mike Francesa, some people in the Giants reporting world and the beat, has been a consistent message of they're not as worried about the GM position because they have much bigger problems to deal with on the ownership side. And they're specifically discussing John's health and succession, right? And they're saying, well, we're dealing with that. And therefore we're not quite thinking about GM. And now they're dealing with the head coaching search and they're thinking it's all too much. Okay. Let's just grant that that's probably true. It hasn't been confirmed, but I think Mike Francesa is a pretty reliable person in sports, New York sports. I think when he said it, I kind of believed it. That's probably what's going on. It's a believable story, right? That they're saying, oh, we'll deal with it later. What does that actually, let's interpret that. What does that mean? One, it probably means that they just don't value the GM position anymore and they could care less what happens to it. I think that's actually pretty true, that they don't care who the GM is because they're, number one, they think the head coach is way more important, which they may be right about. But number two, they don't plan on letting whoever said GM is actually make football operations decisions independently anymore. And I think that's probably true. And I think we should address that because that's the big elephant in the room here, which is it almost doesn't matter who the GM is if this is their approach, right? If we don't really care who the GM is, whether it's tomorrow through the draft next year, we're more worried about head coach and which one of us is taking over. What the signal they're sending is we're going to be running football operations. That's a clear signal. We're going to be running football operations. We're the Joneses. That's what they're saying. So I want to hear somebody in our beat ask them directly, are you basically doing what Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones are doing? Because if that's what you're doing, just say so, right? Own it. Own it. If you're not taking GM seriously, own it and say that's what we're doing. At least then we know what's happening. But if you're going to tell me that the GM matters, then I'm going to ask you, how in the fuck do you think it's okay to bring back a GM with this guy's record? How do you justify that? Because I think the two can't be true at the same time.
It's an embarrassing new low that this organization has reached, retaining Joe Schoen for what the success that this team has had. And it doesn't even feel like the Giants are trying to defend it anymore. It really doesn't feel like they're even trying to defend it, which makes it that much more sad. And I honestly don't even feel like I have to sit here and shit on Joe Schoen. You'll do that plenty tomorrow, tune into Big Blue Banter, but because everybody wants him gone. With a few exceptions, everybody wants him gone, and the Giants aren't even really trying to discuss. So that's not even the discussion anymore. It's why the Giants are too big of cowards to make that move now. And, what we've been saying forever is, can they, and are they considering, and will they consider putting a real football president and CEO that's not a family member in charge? And I think that needs to be a discussion, because I'll say this, as fans, I know I'll sit here and push for Joe Schoen to be fired and all that. I'm telling you, that's something we've all wanted for a long time. God forbid, I want John to stay healthy, but if and when that time comes and he needs to be replaced, that is the only time you are going to potentially see that. If it's ever going to happen, it is going to be now. It is going to be we can talk about Chris Mara. That would be the obvious relation. I want to, if people don't know, Chris Mara and Steve Tisch do not have a good relationship at all. And we can get into the details about that in the show. But I don't think that's where Steve Tisch wants to go. And I do think that there is a reality that if they can't find a pseudo replacement on the Maris side, that they may look into a true president and CEO.
Well, then let's get into that. All right,
Okay.
because I think it's worth discussing. I mean, we could rehash our last year's episode a little bit about the nepotism stuff. I think most people here did tune into it, and we went through the history of the Giants. Long storied problems with nepotism. We could definitely get into that, but I think we should actually just talk about these scenarios that might be playing out up top.
Let's do that
right?
first.
Yeah. So I'll start, and I'll just kind of lay it up for you here. Again, speculation is, with John's help, that there is a succession issue going on up top because they haven't settled it, which is egregious. But that, if you think about it, means that Steve Tisch and somebody from the Mara side have to come to an agreement on who runs things. And so I guess there's some input, I would presume, from Julia Koch, although I don't think she has any kind of voting control at this point. But let's just say it's between Steve Tisch and somebody from the Mara side. They have to decide who from the Mara side will represent what was previously represented by John Mara, assuming he's not able to do so. That would mean that now John Mara's current role is president of the organization. So somebody would have to be president of the organization. That means football side, business side. Chris Mara, as far as I can tell, has no business experience at all. None. I believe he has a bachelor's in arts from Boston College. I don't think he ever actually did anything business-wise other than I guess he had an analytics company for a while. I'm not sure what his business involvement was with that.
The closest I would say that he really came is he ran that arena football team for like 4 years, and he kind of did everything involved there. That's probably the closest he's had to it.
So Chris Mara is one person to, and then you have business side, you have football side, and Steve Tisch has to agree to this, right? He has to be okay with it. He was always okay with it with John Mara. He always let John Mara kind of do whatever he wanted to for the most part. And it is well documented that he does not get along great with Chris Mara. And we know this mainly because he objected to Chris Mara's, candidacy for general manager when Ernie Accorsi stepped down. He objected pretty vehemently to it. And, and that caused a lot of
push from the Mara's side to get that done. He put his foot down and said it wasn't happening.
The only Maras that, as far as I can tell, that are involved in regular football operations for the Giants are John, Chris, Susan McDonald, John's little sister, who is Tim McDonald's mother, and I think Frank Mara, who is the director of facilities or something like that. They have 7 other siblings who are completely uninvolved in regular day-to-day activities of the Giants. So one of those 4 is going to have to represent the Giants in all likelihood. And that's where it gets tricky, right? So we're hearing rumors that this battle of succession is happening, and Chris Mara probably is the most likely person to take over for John. What do you think it would take for Steve Tisch to be okay with that?
It would be hard. I think what it would come down to at this point is there needs to be somebody there who he can trust to keep Chris Mara at bay, because I don't think he can trust that Chris Mara is not going to come in there and just run general manager, because that was what he stopped him. And he trusted John to his word that that's not what Chris would be doing, that Jerry Reese would be general manager. And, he trusted John. They had a great relationship. And I think he needs somebody either independent or that he can trust to make sure that's not happening.
What's his recourse if he doesn't get that? If the Mara family comes back on their own side, right, and they amongst themselves, because they have 45% interest in the team, Steve Tisch and his family have 45%, and 10% belongs to the Kochs. If the Mara clan comes back and says, Chris is our guy, he's our representative for the Mara interests, he's who we trust to do this, and Steve Tisch says, I want a president of football operations or a CEO or somebody else in between here, I don't want you in charge, and they say no, what can he realistically do?
He can threaten to sell his shares to the Kochs, who have right now 10% of the team, and threaten to give them majority ownership. or at least equal. I don't know what the rules are in the contract, but I'm sure they could at least give them equal, and they're not going to roll over like the Tisches do and play backseat. If they're investing that type of money into this team, $5 billion, they're going to want input.
Yeah, I fail to find any other thing that Steve Tisch could or would do to try to get what he wants, other than to say, I am not going to be okay with this unless X, Y, and Z happen. We've heard the word concessions come up, and rumors. And if he's going to have any kind of stick to this carrot, it's got to be that. I mean, I can't think of anything else other than, look, if I don't get what I want, if you don't do what I want, if you don't get the results that I want, then I don't want my family invested in this anymore because you're running it into the ground. And there's this willing buyer over here, and I can just, say I'm selling my share, and you have rights of first refusal. But by the time I sell it, the whole team is probably worth $12 to $14 billion or whatever it is. In which case, you're going to owe me $6 billion, and I know you don't have $6 billion, so she's going to get it. That's his. I think that's the only real leverage Steve Tisch has in this. That's substantial. That would be meaningful, because he has until now shown no appetite for anything that is related to football operations. I don't think he's going to come in and run things. I don't think he's going to do any of the work himself. So I think he's going to have to use that threat, or he's just going to have to acquiesce to what the Maras want, right? So either we get a president of football operations, an independent person, maybe somebody that Roger Goodell recommends. We've seen Roger Goodell at the game, 2-3 weeks in a row now. Talking to Steve Tisch, having meetings with them, and maybe this is the discussion. Hey, Roger, just like Pete Rozelle did back in 1977 or 78 with George Young. Yeah, I should know that year. I was born that year. But like, other than that, at that time, Pete Rozelle stepped in and helped them find George Young. Right. I wonder if could we be looking at a situation where Steve Tisch says, hey, we've done this before as an organization. I wasn't here. My father wasn't here then. But, hey, Roger Goodell, can you recommend someone that would be a happy intermediary here, a good, acceptable president of football operations, a CEO type to run this organization so that all parties are satisfied and I can live with what goes on?
Yeah. And look, the Giants wouldn't be the only organization who has a president and CEO that's not the owner. Most of these a lot of organizations don't run it like a mom and pop shop like the Giants do. There are other organizations that do. The Steelers, for example, very, very similar run organization to the Giants, just much, much more successful. But yeah, it does, it gives that feeling to me, Sal. When I keep seeing Roger Goodell game after game, I'm hearing it might be at this game too, is why? Why is Roger Goodell there? And I think the answer is clear, is that it's something with how we're going to move forward with John. And yeah, I think that, there is a reality that they're saying, hey, like, they want the Giants to be great. Of course they want the Giants to be great because it's good for business. And I think that there's a reality that, hey, it's like you have a league office full of, talented people who could run this team, other people around the league that you have connection to. Like, we need our next George Young. And maybe it wouldn't be the same. Maybe it's not going to be it's not going to be George Young in the sense of the football operations, but it's going to be somebody who can run the team from the top down and hire and put the right people in place. That's what this team needs.
I'm feeling, I don't want to say hopeful or optimistic, but I'm beginning to feel like there's at least that possibility on the table. And I just pointed the Roger Goodell presence at these games. Roger Goodell is in New York City. He doesn't need to come to these games. He's at these Giants games week after week. I presume a lot of that has to do with John's health, but John's probably not at these games if he's not well, So who's he talking to, right? Why is he there? You have to assume, and we know he talked to Steve Tisch. He's probably talking to Chris Mara and other members of the Mara family, but why? Why is he there? And it's got to be you'd have to think it's about this issue, right? What's going on? They don't need John Mara. They don't need Roger Goodell to inform him if they've made a decision amongst themselves, amongst owners who are already known and accepted that, hey, this is what we're doing, right? The succession plan is in place. The same succession plan was acceptable. It's there. The NFL actually has a succession plan requirement, right, for continued leadership of an organization that can make decisions for the NFL team. It's probably been in place. Why is he there and having these discussions? You have to at least think there's the possibility that, can we get an independent person here? And I hope that's the case. If not, if it's not an independent person, and we should get back to the independent people because I know you came up with some names, but the other possibility is that Chris Mara just kind of wins, right? Like, he just takes over, and he's now the head of everything, the president of the organization, the GM, the whole thing. So hold on.
Oh, man.
But let's start with the first proposition. If he is going to recommend, or there will be some approach for an independent person, we've talked about a few names ourselves. We've heard it from other people too. Give me some ideas of who you think would be somebody that would make sense as an external president of football operations.
Sure. And, if we hear more about this and this actually becomes a reality, we'll do a whole show on this. But for now, here's just some exploratory names if this thing is something to play out. The first one I'll mention before I get into some of the ones I was kind of looking into, our friend Ask brought up, and I thought it was a great, start to this and a great recommendation. And that was Mark Murphy, former CEO and president of the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers have a rule where once you turn 70 years old, you have to step down from your position as president and CEO. Mark Murphy just stepped down this past season, so he's still 70, only 70, quote unquote. He's an older guy, obviously, and he would probably have to set up a successor to him. But he's a guy who's run, a fantastic, successful organization for a long time. So that's one I think you'd have to consider. Some other names. Alex Shiner. He works in the NFL front office right now, I believe, or used to. But he's used to. He's former,
in private equity now.
Yeah, he was former president of the Cleveland Browns, and he was a senior executive for the Dallas Cowboys. He actually oversaw the whole building of AT&T Stadium and things like that. So, he's very, very involved in those roles. Jason Wright is another one. He's a former president of the Washington Commanders. He was actually a finalist for this Packers CEO job last time they went through it. They actually brought in 90 people. So that shows you, how many candidates could potentially be out there. The Packers brought in and interviewed 90 people to replace Mark Murphy. This one is probably, I would say, one makes the most sense to me if they were going to do it. Brian Rolap, he used to work for the 49ers back in the day, and then he was the chief media and business officer for the NFL. He oversaw media rights deals and league strategy, and he was basically seen as Roger Goodell's right-hand man and his eventual successor. But this last summer, he took a job as CEO of the PGA Tour. So I don't know if he'd want to step away from that or not, but I think that would be somebody who I would imagine Roger Goodell would recommend. There's one other name that I came across. There's some other ones that I came across. One other name I did want to bring up, and I was looking to him, I thought would be, to me, the slam dunk hire, the guy I would want just off these quick looks. And that's Troy Vincent. He is actually a New Jersey native. He was a 15-year player in the NFL. He played for the Dolphins, Eagles, Bills, and Redskins at the time. And he has a really, really interesting career where it just seems like he's a good dude who's been involved. I mean, he was a Walter Payton Man of the Year. He got put in the Walter Payton Man of the Year Ring of Honor. He's a guy who, while he was in the league, set up this relationship with Wharton to create this fellowship for NFL players to get to get into business after their careers. He was in the NFLPA and in charge of that after during the final years of his NFL career. Then he stepped in he stepped in to the NFL front office. He was relations vice president or something. He became the vice president of football operations for the NFL. He's been very, very involved there, and he's a guy who just has a very impressive record of just tons and tons of things he has been involved in the community, a ton of impressive positions that I think would translate to a position like this, and just a true football guy who knows football. I mean, this is a guy who was a player for 15 years that's been working in football and working the NFL front office ever since he left. These are the type of names I think you want to keep an eye out for, these people that the Giants could bring in if they went this route, where there's plenty of impressive people that they could consider.
Yeah. I'm going to put another name up. Our friend Ask Seven, Rick Spielman, former GM and current senior football advisor. That's another name. Let's focus on a couple of names you mentioned. So Murphy is a fascinating one. This is not a person, as you mentioned, that was pushed out because he was incompetent or they were failing results. They actually had outstanding results running the Packers. And again, the Packers are a publicly owned company. So they have an interesting structure. They have a board and they have rules, and they have really strict corporate rules as a publicly owned company. And they're very successful in how they do things. They actually have that is a franchise that actually has consistent accountability to their shareholders, which are usually Packers fans, right? Plenty of Packers fans own a share of the team, and they demonstrate consistently good results because that's how they operate. They think like this. So he's someone that I think, as a New Jersey native, might be very interesting. He has a lot of experience running a well-run organization. I think he'd be kind of a slam dunk transition hire to help you bring in a general manager and eventual successor. His age is the only negative, but you're not asking him to do this for like 10 years. You're probably asking him to do it for like 2 to 3 years. The other one, I mean, I know you're excited about him, and we should talk about Troy Vincent. Troy Vincent is fascinating. And for those who remember, we're old enough to remember, Troy Vincent was a menace of a safety. Played on the Dolphins, the Eagles, was an all-pro, really good football player. And like you mentioned, really focused on honing his business career during his NFL tenure and afterwards, and has been in the NFL offices now for like 11 years or something like that, and has built up the chops. He's probably a successor, honestly, to Roger Goodell at some point, right? He's right up there as somebody who could theoretically take over all of NFL operations, which obviously would be much more lucrative. But, imagine a world in which Roger Goodell is being asked, hey, Roger, who do you recommend to fix this sinking ship and help run this? And he said, Troy might be interested in fixing the Giants. Take a look at him. He can run your organization well. He can bring in a good GM. He can streamline the way your operations are run from a business perspective and from a football perspective. He can fix up the Giants, patch them up. It would really be good for the team, obviously. And then if that obviously pads his resume. And eventually, I would imagine he's in contention to replace Goodell when Goodell retires. That's a name that really has me intrigued since you mentioned him earlier today. And I would love to see a guy like that, a former player, come in who has gravitas with the guys in the locker room as well. That would be the perfect kind of person, because that's the kind of guy ownership can't touch, right?
Yeah.
Hire a guy like that. He has the immediate respect of everybody, not just the ownership, but the players, the coaches. It's the kind of person you want in this world. So if there's any world in which there is a CEO or a president of football operations that's external, that's a guy I think that should rise near the top of the list.
Yeah. So, just some names to keep in mind if this is the route the Giants do go down. And, I do think that there it could be something. We talked about, I don't think Chris Mara is going to get the job easily. He may get the job. Steve Tisch may back down, and we should maybe talk about the reality of that, and why the idea of that might scare us, and get into some of the nepotism and where Chris Mara's hand has been in the failure of the Giants, and where it could just continue to go down a place that has brought us nothing but losses and struggles. But if he wins and I assume gets his way, I think this is something that could happen. And I do think this is the best possible thing that could happen for the New York Giants.
You hope so. And we're talking about this in a world where Joe Schoen is probably retained for the time being, right? In this situation, if something like this were to happen, there's a succession plan at the top that leads to an agreement between Steve Tisch and, let's say, Chris Mara, and this external person is brought in, then we would presume Joe Schoen is on a clock that's not going to last very long. In all likelihood, that person is going to come in, streamline things, and eventually say, thanks, Joe, but we'll take it from here. And they'll bring in their own general manager. Organizations have done things like this. And I go back to the comment that was the text on Rappaport's report about Joe Schoen being here through the draft. You wonder if this is some of the stuff that's going on where they can't come to a consensus yet on who's running things long term. And maybe one of the ideas is, okay, we're beginning to move towards, okay, we're okay with a CEO. We're okay with a president of football operations coming in here. But we got to have somebody run this thing while we go through this transition, right? The day-to-day stuff. And Joe Schoen is here, and he's got the link to the scouting department. So he's going to be here helping, not running necessarily, but helping through the draft. And I that wording, maybe I'm overinterpreting it, but it really made me feel like there's a world in which that's his role here, that he's a transitory figure.
It's definitely the phrasing, that was something that set off a red flag for me. It's like, whoa, why did he phrase it that way? Why did he phrase it for the draft? It's not something that is unheard of in the NFL. It is something that happens. It's happened a few times. There's been bad times where it's happened with like the Jets, for example. Adam Gase pushed out his GM and they brought in Joe Douglas after the draft, but there's been more successful ones. It's been the Buffalo Bills did this when they brought in Brandon Beane. The Kansas City Chiefs did this when they brought in Brett Veach. Like, there are good examples too. I don't like it. It's a weird, very Giants way of going about it. But if we could get the CEO and president, should be able to do both. But if you can get the CEO and president and they can pick the GM, that interests me.
Yeah. And I think that would be the optimal outcome here. Let's talk about the less optimal outcomes, because that's probably the more probable outcomes.
Yes.
Outcome number one, Chris Mara just takes over. And I think this is, if you ask me to handicap what is the most probable outcome here, it's just at the end of the day, Steve Tisch doesn't want to do the work. Chris Mara wants to do the work. Chris Mara takes over. And essentially, in that world, Joe Schoen sticks around as long as the old man's around, or maybe through the draft or something like that. But ultimately, Chris Mara is in charge, right? He's sitting at the front of the desk and he's saying, okay, who are we signing? Who are we paying? Who are we not signing? Let me see your draft board. And I'm going to ultimately make the final yes or no call on who we draft, what we do. And presumably that means he's probably bringing in his own people again, right? I mean, they're people that he had here that a lot of fans had a lot of, I don't know whether it was justified or not, but they didn't like those guys, like a guy like Chris Pettit, some of those guys are probably coming back, right? If Chris Mara takes over fully over time, he's going to want his people in the building, people he trusts. But ultimately, he's running the show. He's always wanted to be the GM of the Giants. He's wanted to run things. If he gets control in this way, he is essentially Jerry Jones. So what does that world look like?
It's bad, man. I mean, I think to me, is the worst case scenario. And like people ask if things could get worse, and I would say yes. I think Mara with absolutely no football people to try to guide them in the right way could be very bad. And it's something that's very, very, very hard to get away from, because owners can't be fired. And that's the spot we've gotten into as these guys have raised up the the personnel chart, they don't go back down. The owners don't go down. They only go up, and they stay where they are. And it would be very hard. It would take, like the Kochs buying the team or something really to get Chris Mara out of that position once he got there. So that's the scary part. I'll let you say kind of your thoughts on it. I wanted to kind of go through, I think there's some fluff being put out about Chris Mara. I know there's some former Giants player who's talking about Chris Mara and how great a job he could do. And I wanted to get into some of that, but what are your thoughts?
My honest thought is I don't know. I don't know what Chris Mara is or isn't. I think what I've heard is, because I've never heard him publicly speak, right? I don't have a feel for the individual. I've only heard stories that he is not well liked, and not well liked by people who obviously have a lot of patience with some pretty detestable people, like Dave Gettleman. So if they can't like you, you must have some sort of personality, to work with. And so I imagine he's not the easiest person in the world, or hasn't been in the past the easiest person in the world to work with. So let's start there. Day-to-day wise, I feel like they're going to go from like the cream puff situation with John Mara, right, to a much different environment in that building. That doesn't mean it's worse, from a football outcome standpoint. The optimistic side of me says this guy and this family have been kind of trying to run interference for years, and they've been trying to run it through this barrier of a GM for a few years, and maybe that is the problem, right? Maybe they don't see eye to eye. Maybe there are issues there, and that leads to a lot of dysfunction. And then maybe if he just rips off the bandage and says, "I'm just going to run this. I'm going to own it myself." Not that they would publicly do that, but essentially doing it, right, where they own it, maybe they would get better results. There's a sick curiosity in me to find out what it looks like, right? I don't think that's what'll happen. I think it'll probably be a poorly run organization, is my guess. There'll be personality issues. There are probably going to be reports of unhappy people and mutinies and fighting, and internal fighting and disagreements between ownership. And my guess is it leads to some chaos and dysfunction if he's running everything. That ultimately leads to eventually the Tisch family dissolving their interest in the Giants. I think that is the most likely thing to happen if Chris Mara gets full control, honestly. But the football product probably isn't going to be the best.
Yeah, I think the first part is it's a very optimistic view. I think that there is an idea of just putting it out in the open, and no more hiding behind people. But I think the way to get back to success is not giving these people who are the only pieces in failure, as we continue to flip everything but them and decide we're going to give them more power. I think it's getting those guys out and giving them less power, and even if you don't get them out, getting people of stronger voices who can handle guys like that. I mean, I think it's something that Jerry Reese did very well for a long time, but kind of lost his handle on it towards the end. For thoughts, I want to get a little bit into Chris Mara and who Chris Mara is, because I think that there's a lot of people, whether it's people who are connected to the Giants, or just honestly, I think people a little bit not informed on Chris Mara, talking about these things, because there was a not even a report, there was fan rumors out there that Chris Mara doesn't like Joe Schoen. I haven't heard that. I don't necessarily think that's true, because I think this would be a much more slam dunk thing that Joe Schoen would be fired if you had Chris Mara also pushing for it right now. So I really don't think it's true. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But I want to kind of get into the life of Chris Mara in this front office, and kind of where it all starts is Chris Mara worked as a scout for this team back in kind of the golden days, and he was seen and known as a good scout. But it got to the point where he wanted to get a real position in player personnel, as a director or vice president of player personnel. And what George Young told him is, quote unquote, "We can't have any fireproof heads of player personnel." That was the words of George Young. And those are important words, I think, to keep in mind. And it's something that the Giants should have heeded, and they didn't. And ever since they didn't listen to George Young and put ownership into these roles, this organization has gone downhill almost immediately. Because the first time it happened was in 2012 when Chris Mara got put into director of player personnel or vice president of player personnel. But before that happened, there was a time in 2007 we alluded to earlier. He came back to the organization after leaving, after George Young wouldn't let him get promoted. He came back in 2003 and as a VP of player evaluation, again, probably a role he shouldn't have had, but George Young was gone by that point. And Jerry Reese, or then Aaron Corsi stepped down and the GM job was open. John Mara and the rest of the Mara family was pushing very hard for Chris Mara to get the GM job. And Steve Tisch stepped in and said no, said we can't have a Mara running the football operations like that. So they went with Ernie Accorsi's pick and they hired Jerry Reese and we won 2 Super Bowls. After that, I know a lot of people know Chris Mara eventually interviewed for the Falcons GM job. That was a search run by Ernie Accorsi. Ernie Accorsi threw him a bone and gave him a recommendation because he was the advisor on that. He interviewed for it, but he ended up withdrawing his name after some pushback from his family members on it. So, some just last couple things I want to touch on with this is I think that there's a lot of shit out there with Chris Mara, and there's a lot of shit people don't know. There's a lot of shit I don't know, a lot of shit we don't know. I'm just going to get into what's publicly out there. And, if you read The Autopsy by Tyler Dunn, you'll get a lot of this from there. But I think 2 of the most concerning stories to me about Chris Mara, which makes me just not feel that he should be the guy running this team and why he has been an issue for so long. One, this was from the story. Russell Okung, the offensive tackle, he was interested in signing with the Giants free agent. I know a lot of Giants fans wanted him that time. We desperately needed offensive tackle help, and we were looking into him. And apparently, he stepped in and said that Okung's ex-agent, not even the agent at the time, he decided to go without an agent, that phrase, called him an asshole so the Giants didn't sign him. That's what he did. That is the person, and he is an asshole, and that's why I call him an asshole. And that's the type of person Chris Mara is. And the other story I think is looks very, very bad on him is in 2015. This man is the exact thing. He was the VP of player personnel, and he is there for the draft. He's supposed to be for the draft. He's part of that front office, just like everybody else. That's what he wants to be. He wants to be in the front office. He wanted to be the GM. But this is a guy who's ownership, and he can come and go as he pleases. And there's no accountability in that building for a guy like him. So know what happened in 2015 is on the 3rd day of the draft. Oh, that actually, it had some scheduling conflicts. He liked racing horses, and the Kentucky Derby was that day. So he left. He left on the 3rd day of the draft, and despite him having, the third most important role in that entire front office, he was nowhere to be found because he's the owner and he can do whatever the fuck he wants to do. And that's what he's continued to do throughout his entire time here, is be involved when he wants to be and not be involved when he doesn't. And I have no doubt in my mind that Chris Mara would be an utter disaster.
It's hard to argue with the history and the facts here, I think the comment from the Tyler Dunn article about, I think this was from the Tyler Dunn article about the things Jerry Reese had to deal with, or maybe this was from Dan Duggan's autopsy.
No, I think this was from the Tyler Dunn. I think the one you
right. So, this is a comment worth, for those who don't remember the details of what Jerry Reese had to deal with after, presumably Chris Mara entered the organization as back in a senior role with personnel after the 2011 Super Bowl victory. And, there were a lot of rumors that ownership had a lot of say in the operations of the team, and Jerry Reese had to navigate that. And here's a quote from that article. One person close to Gettleman's predecessor, Jerry Reese, recalls people gunning for the ex-GM. He needed to fight battles privately that the public never realized. Quote, and it's not just a scout, the source says. You are talking about ownership doing this. Ownership masquerading as a personnel department, making decisions and going against what you want to do. Years and years of this. The fruition of this is why they are where they are. That's the thing with the Giants. It's not as if you're hiring regular people and saying, hey, let's earn your job and work your way up. They're family. So that's a direct quote from a source, that was close to Jerry Reese about the dynamic that existed with Reese and Mara. And trust me, I'm not a big fan of the whole Chris Mara thing either. I troll about it a lot, but part of me just says if he's going to take over, if Steve Tisch is going to acquiesce and just let this man take over, which realistically means he's running things, unless Roger Goodell steps in, right? Or they get him to step in and put somebody else in charge. He's running things. And you almost don't want a GM to be subject to it, right? You almost don't want a GM to have to navigate it. Just own it, run it, be the Joneses, right? Run it and do whatever you want. And the part of the reason I'm saying this is, again, because if he openly is running things, the way I see it is you're either going to get a good outcome where it actually works, in which case everybody's happy, your team's winning, things are working, great. You don't have to talk about this again. Or it's a disaster, it's not working, it's more of the same. And in that circumstance, I think that might be the final straw when it comes to the current makeup of ownership. The Tisches may not want to be involved with a failing product after a certain amount of time if Chris Mara gets his long-lasting wish to run things and can't do it. The Kochs, who right now have a 10% interest, I think would get more aggressive and say, we would like to have more of a say here. We'd like to get more access to this. They would have more discussions with the Tisches, which they probably are already having with both sides, right? The Tisches and the Maras, about, hey, what's it going to take for us to get the rest of this? I think this would expedite the exit of the legacy family from ownership of this team or controlling ownership of this team if he fails. I don't want to go through 5 years of pain to find out necessarily, but I suspect that's on the table.
I think the issue here, Sal, is you say 5 years of pain. This could be 15 years of pain. You don't like ownerships you don't know how long an ownership is going to be in charge once he's in charge. There is no going back unless they sell, and they don't have to sell. They could continue to run that team, and Chris Mara could continue to run this team to the ground, and somebody would have to step up and stop him. And there's no guarantee that's going to happen. I do think that there's a reality that could happen, like you're saying, but I also think there's a reality that he continues to run this team and there's no one there to stop him. And it's until Chris Mara passes away one day.
Why did they select the Tisches as the 10% owners?
The Kochs.
The Kochs. Why did the ownership group, whether it was the Tisches or the Maras, or both cumulatively, right? Whoever brought them in, we've heard rumors that it might be the Tisches that brought them in. They would have more access to them. The Maras are nobody. The Tisches are. Why would they bring in Julia Koch, worth $81 billion, of all people, to get this 10% share?
Yeah. Here's the thing, though. If they're bringing the Kochs in to sell it to the Kochs, whenever they get control, if and when they get control, they'll deal with the Maras as they will then. But I want to keep Chris Mara at bay as long as I can until then, because the Kochs will do their thing about trying to get their power. I have no question that they will continue to push to get ownership stake.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is one family or both are looking for a massive buyout at some point from somebody who is going to be a vetted owner in the NFL, who has the access to capital to get that to them at maximal value, which she is, right? John Mara, we don't know his net worth. It's estimated. People estimated it being maybe $500 million with an M. Steve Tisch has an estimated net worth of $1.6 billion. The Tisch family in total has an estimated net value of about $10 billion. Julia Koch herself is worth $81 billion. So she's sitting there, able to buy them out. I don't think you let her in the door unless your thought process is, I do want someone to buy this out now.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the Tisches and they just want their money, right? They may say, hey, we're kind of tired of dealing with this. Our father bought this, 1990 for whatever he bought it for, however many millions of dollars he bought it for, and we can cash out our 45% at $6 billion or something like that and walk away,
mm-hmm.
or $7, whatever it ends up being, right?
Mm-hmm.
That may be part of it, and we don't have to deal with this headache. Just take the money, goes into our trust, whatever. The Maras, as I mentioned, there are 11 Maras that are Wellington Mara's children. 11.
I think 39 grandkids.
Right. Now think about this for a second. 11 Maras that are the children of Wellington Mara that now control 45% of the Giants. They're not, 3 of them are four of them are involved at all in Giants operations of those 11, just from that generation. That means 7 are not, right, in regular operations. And I don't know this for a fact, obviously, but you would presume that Wellington Mara probably structured it in such a way where they have a roughly equal share of the Giants in terms of profits, things like, whatever it may be, shares, equity. The Giants' profitability on block as a whole, the whole Giants organization profitability year over year right now is about $200 million. They're getting 45% of that, and you divide it by 11, right? And so maybe each family is getting $8-9 million, maybe, right? $8-9 million, something like that. And then that's, like you said, it's split up into multiple, it's not going to all the grandkids, but it's going to eventually go to the grandkids, right? And all the other grandkids, meaning people who are like my age, right? In their 40s.
Yeah.
People like that. If you're them, if you're the other 8 family members that are not John and Susan and Chris, and you're looking at this and saying, we don't get much out of this, right? We get money, but we're not getting real money, like real opulent wealth level money out of this. You guys, we don't get to play owner. We don't get to play GM. We don't get to do any of that shit. You have Julia Koch sitting there ready to pay us out. Maybe that pressure comes internally. Hey, at some point, that noise from the family is like, when are we going to get our buyout? Because if you buy us out at, let's say, $12 billion, and we get 45% of that, right? And then you split it 11 ways. Well, that's like $500 million per family as a buyout. When does that pressure grow? And I think that's a real thing. And so I think from both sides, there is the potential push from people who are not necessarily Chris Mara, people who may not be Steve Tisch, to sell the damn thing at some point. And I do think all of this plays into it. When it happens, how it happens. Are you okay with Chris Mara running things? If you are there limits on this? Is there a clock on this? You got Jackson Dart. Is the Jackson Dart era it, right? Is that it? Like, win a Super Bowl with Jackson Dart, make a Super Bowl contender with Jackson Dart, or it's over? You have to start wondering, is this where this is headed?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, the other most optimistic thing for Giants fans is I do think that there's a world, at least the Tisch sell, and maybe the Maras too. I mean, well, what happens when it goes to the next generation? I feel like if I was a part of the family, I feel like, am I going to just get pushed out of this thing? Like I'm not, my family wasn't involved in football operations. They have an 11th of that 50%, but how does that get split amongst us? Are we still involved? Like, at some point, it just gets split between too many people, and it's hard to deal with something like that. This happens all the time in business,
right?
And companies get sold. I do think it's something worth monitoring. With that said, I don't want to fucking see Chris Mara running this team at any point in time, even if that's coming. I mean, I think that there is this idea on Twitter that people have deluded themselves that Chris Mara could be some sort of savior for the Giants because he's a football guy. And I just need people to understand who Chris Mara is. This is a guy who I had Tyler Dunn and Big Blue Beards when we had this. We talked to him about some of this. He told us that after the article came out that on Christmas Eve, Chris Mara found him on LinkedIn and called him a fucking asshole. Like this guy is a dickhead. This guy is, when he got passed up for the GM job as an owner, as a board member, skipped Jerry Reese's introductory press conference. I don't think it's a coincidence that Jerry Reese is still not in the Ring of Honor. Chris Mara hates Jerry Reese. He always has hated Jerry Reese because he
won 2 Super Bowls.
2 Super Bowls, not in the Ring of Honor, because he took what he felt belonged to him. This is a guy who, again, quote from this article that Chris Mara and Tim McDonald, they felt were labeled as a shadow scouting staff for John Mara, where they had this influence where they gave him this information. It's their fucking problems, and they all like John Mara has been a problem in his own right, but the biggest problem, I truly believe, and a lot of this article gets into that, and I really empower you guys to read it, is who he empowered to do their jobs in this. Yeah. And a big part of that is Chris Mara.
I'm going to put my beanie back on to inspire you guys now, because I'm going to tell you a story. I am a Mets fan. And I have had this conspiracy theory about the Kochs and their intention to buy out this team since the day I heard Julia Koch's name. I was like, wow, why choose her? Right. I've told you this from the day it happened. I've been conspiracy theorizing about this for a long time now, that I think this is going down, that this sale is going down. Why pick her? Why now? Right. There was a time with the Mets, my beloved, Metsies, where we were in hell for a very long time, because our owners were the worst. We had Fred Wilpon and his idiot son, Jeff, running things into the ground. And Jeff was de facto general manager of the team, right? He was always interfering, always pushing, getting his people involved, messing up everything when it came to baseball operations. Awful, right? And they then ran into financial issues, for those who remember, because they were getting ill-gotten gains from Bernie Madoff. And when the whole Bernie Madoff pyramid scheme came to an end, their financial, faucet dried up. And all of a sudden, they started cutting off investments into the team pretty substantially. The Mets were spending like they were like the Pittsburgh Pirates. They did not want to put money in the team, and it was being run to shit. It was an awful time to be a fan. And what happened then was that they were in trouble, and the commissioner of Major League Baseball essentially insisted that the Mets ownership hire Sandy Alderson as their president and general manager. He insisted. For those who don't know baseball, Sandy Alderson was the father of Moneyball. It wasn't Billy Beane. Billy Beane was his disciple. Sandy Alderson invented it, and the owner, the MLB commissioner, said, "You guys are a disgrace in the New York market. You're cheap. You don't have money. You need someone who can operate your organization well." Sandy Alderson built up a big farm system. They went to the World Series. All that's it, right? And he improved the team in the short term. But what happened in the long term was they were not able to make their payments on the stadium. They were not able to make their interest payments on things. Their financial issues led to them selling off small private equity stakes of the team. Initially, I think it was like 8%. To who? Steve Cohen, SAC Capital, billionaire investor. And then over time, over a few years, he slowly increased it. I think he went from like 8% to 20%. And then before you knew it, a few years ago, he bought the whole damn thing, right? They just couldn't run things anymore. And they brought in a guy with a lot of money who was a Mets fan, who was dying to get his hands on it. And he got the whole thing. And the moral of the story is, shitty owners with a lot of nepotism who don't have the cash flow to run this thing properly, when they start bringing in somebody who has money, real money, to own it, it's for a reason, that their eyes are on a sale to get the hell out of this and cash out when they can. And I truly believe that is what is happening. And it may be sooner than later. I'll take this off now. It's very hot. But I do think that's what's happening here. This feels very analogous to the Mets and the Steve Cohen thing with the Giants and Julia Koch. I don't know when, but that's my theory. I think at some point in the not so distant future, we're going to be hearing about a capital event with Julia Koch taking over a larger portion of this team.
I don't think it's a crazy theory at all. You've said it for a while, and the more time's gone on, the more a little bit of whispers here and there that might be true. I don't know when John got sick, but was this intentionally? Were they intentionally chosen after they knew John got sick? I think that's a real possibility. I don't know that to be true. That I could be totally false, but I think that is a very believable scenario with how close these timelines were. I do think that there's a reality that at least the Tisches could be selling out the share. I think that is, Tisches seem totally uninvolved. Mara's going to be the harder ones to convince, but once John, is gone, whenever that time comes, it's going to get a lot easier.
I mean, what is their interest at this point, right? Like Wellington's gone, John is gone. Chris Mara obviously wants to run things. I get it. After that, I mean, you think the other kids and their grandkids give a shit where they would turn their face away at billions of dollars, right? It's worth that now. There's no guarantee it's going to be worth a lot more in the future. Who knows what the political climate will lead to in the future? There's a lot of things that can happen that can affect the value of a team. So right now they're probably worth I bet you they'd sell for 12 billion today, right? If they went through a sale process. So that is an issue. And I think that is something very real for the Mara clan. And like you said, the Tisches if the Tisches triggered a sale, if they said enough, we're out, and the Maras lost control of the team, if they lost it, you don't think they're going to sell themselves, right? They D-Kid has talked about, legal things like tag along rights, and things like that, where if one party sells, the other party can sell also, and it forces the buyer to buy the whole thing, right? So let's say the Tisch said, we want to sell our 45%. There may be, contractual language that the Maras say, yeah, you have to buy our 45% too. We don't want to be minority owners and not get a payout. Just take the whole thing. And guess what? When you're worth $81.2 billion, okay, you can do that. You don't have to raise money. You have the money and you'll get access to it very easily. So I do think there's a world where this is going down. I think it's definitely going down at some point. To me, it's more of a matter of when than if. But I feel like the things that are going on at the top of the organization right now, I feel like they are expediting that potential, situation, which is maybe why I'm a little less concerned about the Chris Mara thing than you are. I don't want Chris Mara running things either, but I almost feel like this is headed towards a major change in the way the Giants are operated. And listen, if Julia Koch and her family took over, trust me, I'm no fan of the Kochs. But when if I used all of my other views of the world to guide the way I look at sports, I would not be able to watch sports anymore, right? So I'm getting past that shit. But if Julia Koch with all her money took over, you better believe she's going to look at this as a devalued asset, a troubled asset that she could raise the brand value of very quickly. And they would probably put a lot of money in investing into the Giants. I'm talking new stadium, new location, maybe in New York City. You don't know, right? Like they may do things that will be shockingly different than what we're used to. So that's where my eyes are right now. I want to see the Jackson Dart years be successful. I want to see whoever runs things make it work. I don't want to watch 4 wins anymore. I want to see us being a goddamn Super Bowl. We have a quarterback that looks like he can do things. But it may be that we're going through this period where a sale is going to happen, dude. And I think we should accept that that's a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something to think about. I think it's something that is a very real possibility. But at the same time, I also think as fans, we need to focus on the here and now too, which is, the things that can be controlled right now with, having the Joe Judge type reaction from fans and maybe getting a change and taking Joe Schoen out as well. Maybe, finally getting the CEO president of football operation that's not a Mara in charge. These are things that could help us win now, that could help turn this thing around now. I don't want to be necessarily, personally, I don't want to necessarily be sitting around waiting for the Kochs to get control and hoping maybe one day this team can be good. I need them to figure this shit out ASAP.
Well, I mean, we haven't discussed the football side of it today. We've talked about the executive ownership side of it, right? And the management of it. Before we end at some point today, we should talk about the football side of it, right? What does it actually mean to the football team? Let's play out those scenarios. Scenario A, Joe Schoen stays, at least through the draft, right? I don't care who the owner is. Joe Schoen is here. New head coach comes in. I don't actually disagree with the idea that we have a core of some talent that's worth building around. There's some good players on this team.
We just don't have a team.
We don't have a team. It's not well put together, and there's no depth. It's a mishmash of players. A lot of failed draft picks, a lot of free agents that have been, emergently added to make up for those failed draft picks. It's just kind of a mess. Let's just say we actually have we did have objectively a good 2025 NFL draft. I think objectively, Abdul Carter, Jackson Dart, Darius Alexander, Marcus Bowe, stop right there. Really good.
Give Joe Schoen his credit. He had a good draft.
It's a good draft. And it's the kind of draft you can build off. What are we looking at next year? Joe Schoen's here. Best case scenario, worst case scenario. What are we looking at next year with a new head coach? Presumably a good head coach, right? Let's just assume it's somebody who knows how to run this thing and operate a proper defense and get these guys organized on game day.
I mean, first thing I'll say, the reality.
Sorry, I forgot about Scat. My bad. Yeah.
I think the reality is if you're getting a new coach, that's the guy who's running this draft. For the most part, I mean, there's already a lot of input that's historically, not just under Joe Schoen, but under Gettleman too, that's been put into input from the coaches that are put into these draft picks. I mean, you saw it with Jackson Dart just last year. You heard it with DeAndre Baker. You heard it with Andrew Thomas during the Gettleman years. You've heard it many times. This input that the coaches have had on these picks. I think that is going. They have a lot of power in this organization. The coaches have a lot of say in these drafts, and I think that's going to only get stronger if they keep John Mara and bring in a new head coach.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
Okay. Because some of the names we've heard, take all your Joe Schoen bile out of it for a second, which I have just as much as you guys. Jeff Hafley, Chris Shula, Clint Kubiak. We've heard Vance Joseph. Am I missing somebody from the list right now of like the guys we're hearing lately? And we heard that we know that Marcus Freeman's out of it. Cut him out. And those are good names.
Yeah, of the ones we've heard recently.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, I mean, I'll just put it up here. A guy that I've promoted. I like this name.
Solid.
It's going to piss off a lot of people. But I personally have been a big Rob Saleh fan. I think he got kind of a raw deal with the Jets, and I think he's a damn good defensive coach. What he's doing with the Niners is impressive.
I think almost like the take I've had a little bit with Kevin Stefanski is like one part just like it's the fucking Browns. Like at the end, like you've seen some good, but at the end of the day, the Browns ruin everybody. They find a way to ruin it. I think you could. I mean, we're the Giants. Before you could say the same shit about us, but you could say that's shit even more about the Jets. Like yeah, it's the Jets. That's what the Jets do.
Right. And I think you have to take that. You have to account for the organizational dysfunction when you're assessing some of these guys, right? You have to. You can't. It's not the only qualifier, but it's a qualifier. And I think that he makes sense by that line of thinking. Stefanski, people are not going to like it, but Stefanski is a guy who fits their checklist, right? Yeah. An experienced head coach, 2-time coach of the year, has had winning programs, offensive guy, has worked with Jim Schwartz, who is one of the preeminent defensive minds of football. And if you can get him with Jim Schwartz, is that not attractive?
Yeah.
Is that not attractive, right? Even if you don't like Stefanski, if you can get Stefanski with Jim Schwartz, is that not attractive?
Definitely is. And I'll say, and one thing I will say in defense of Stefanski and what has been reported out there by some is I think the number one thing that fucked over Stefanski's career over there was ownership pushing for Deshaun Watson. What they continue to do, they continue to insert themselves. That's what bad ownership does. Bad ownership continues to take them down, pushing for Deshaun Watson. And the word is that Stefanski wanted to keep Baker Mayfield. He was perfectly comfortable with keeping Baker Mayfield, and he pushed Deshaun Watson despite all the issues and completely strapping them cap-wise and taking away his draft picks. And that caused a ton of damage to that team.
Yeah. I heard somebody put in the chat, Jordan Raynon with Bobby Skinner yesterday mentioned Matt Burke, the DC of the Texans. I will qualify this by saying that was not the first place Matt Burke has been mentioned. Our friend Ivan, Base 718 on Twitter, who hosts Spaces Daily, has been talking about Matt Burke for weeks. As a guy we should consider the DC, right? The DC with D'Amico Ryans for the Texans, and he's trained under some pretty freaking great coaches like Vance Joseph and others, and Jim Schwartz as well, I believe. So, there are guys out there who have pretty good, especially on the defensive side, pretty good resumes who I think could come in, experienced guys who've been around the league, who I do think I'd feel confident in them building a coaching tree that's excellent, or at least desirable, and walking in, working with, let's say, Chris Mara, right? Chris Mara, and let's say Joe Schoen sitting there too, and whoever else is there, and saying, here's how we would like the organization's vision to look like. Here's how we want the roster to be. Here's what we need. And here are the type of players we would like to get, and having that kind of input in the draft. Now, you still ultimately are depending on Joe Schoen and his scouting department, handing that list of players to these guys. Coaches don't typically watch college players until like a very end, like around the time of the combine, the Senior Bowl, the combine after that. But still, I think there is some hope that if you hire the right coach who is the right leader for this organization and has a good coaching tree that comes with him, that you can supersede some of the concerns you may have with Chris Mara running things. I do think there's a world where that works.
Mm-hmm. You know what's interesting? I just looked at Matt Burke because I was just curious at what his job history is. Two things stood out to me. One, do you want to know where he was a graduate assistant?
Matt Burke?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me.
Boston College.
Of course he was. Yeah. Why would you ask that question otherwise? Yeah.
Do you want to know who he overlapped with in Miami?
Is it Joe Schoen?
Joe Schoen.
Yeah.
Only for a year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was a Vance Joseph guy, right? Because Vance Joseph came from that world too, right? So I think that the link is really Vance Joseph. But I imagine Joe Schoen would give Vance Joseph's name. Just because Joe Schoen gives a person's name doesn't make them a bad name. Vance Joseph, by the way, another guy who got a pretty raw deal as a head coach. Yeah. His years as he was there was for the Paxton Lynch years, if I'm not mistaken, with the Broncos, right? Post Peyton Manning, Paxton Lynch Broncos, towards the end of that ownership group before the Waltons bought them, he got a pretty shitty deal with the Broncos as head coach, and he worked his way up to that job. He actually came back to them as a DC, and he's one of the top 5 DCs in the NFL right now. He's an outstanding developer of talent, especially in terms of coaches underneath him. I wouldn't be opposed to hearing about Vance Joseph. I don't care if it's a guy that Joe Schoen knows. He's a good coach. Charlie Bullen did work with him as well. And I mean, look, I'm not going to fall for the Charlie Bullen thing. People thought I was falling for it, but I will just say that at least for 2 weeks, it's looked a little bit better. A little bit better, and that's all I can say. And maybe there's some continuity. Maybe Bullen can stay on if you hire Joseph as as a defensive coach somewhere, So anyway, I like that name. I think there are guys out there who would have experience, who would be good coaches, who I'm less concerned about Joe Schoen staying, because the dynamic of how the front office is run and how personnel decisions are made is different.
I like Robert Saleh, and I would be encouraged by that signing, but I do think that there's a reality that Robert Saleh may need more time before he gets another shot at head coach. Vance Joseph has done his time. Vance Joseph has put in his time since he got his chance back in, was it 2017 or 2018 or something?
2 years. Yeah.
He deserves another chance somewhere. And he's a great defensive mind. Like you said, he got a very shitty situation with the coach. I think that there's some obvious guys you could bring in. You look at a guy like Davis Webb, who, is seen as a guy who blew Sean Payton away in his interview for quarterback coach. He's a guy who's had familiarity in a lot of different systems now, and more with Sean Payton, that that West Coast. It's like that Sean Payton really kind of created to be his own type of West Coast offense. And a guy, like I said, most importantly, is known as a quarterback guy, a quarterback developer, and that's what you're looking for in a guy for Jackson Dart. So it'd be interesting.
Yep. So I mean, again, I think the point is there's a world where if Joe Schoen stays, you get a good coach who comes in with a good staff, and they do shape personnel. It's not perfect. It's not what we would want, right? If we were designing this thing from scratch, we would say hire a good GM, hire a good president of football operations and a good GM, and let them run things normally, and then let it flow from there. But we're not dealing with normalcy as long as the Maras are here. I don't care how the structure of the organization is, as long as they are here and they have controlling interest in the team, things are not going to be normal. And I think you have to hope that we hit on the coach. If you think about everything, when did LT retire? Around 90, 91, something like that, after the Super Bowl, and like a year or two later, 92. From the time LT retired to now, let's say approximately 35 years, 34 years, something like that. The Giants have basically been a bottom feeder organization that entire time, except for the Eli Manning years, right? And if you think about it, if it wasn't for the son of Archie Manning insisting that he doesn't play for the San Diego Chargers, I think there's a world in which the Giants just are bottom feeding basement dwellers for 30-something consecutive years.
Yeah,
93 season. Thank you.
Outside of a loss to the Ravens in the Super Bowl.
Right. I mean, they did have they had a brief window with Jim Fossil, right? Where they were decent. It was pretty short, but that almost any team in any sport is going to have like that occasional like blip of a year or two. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible not to. But for the most part, like the trajectory of those 30-something years has been in the basement, except for the Eli Manning years. Eli Manning was the only thing that stood between them and being basement dwellers that entire time. And that's that's the reality of living in a Mara world. And this happened before too. This happened in the 70s and the 60s, right? Like this is their history. The Mara family history with the Giants is marked by decades and decades of the Giants being in the basement, and brief periods of success, brief periods of prosperity. And to their credit, when they've had that, they've won Super Bowls, but not a lot of consistent winning in those 50, 60 years.
Like I mentioned earlier, reading through this, it's just the Giants continue to make the same mistakes. And when you read things from 2022, it sounds exactly like what you're saying right now. You go back to, when we brought in George Young in, sounds a lot like right now. There's a lot of like history repeats itself type stuff. Now, I want to read a quote that I pulled from this article. This one's about, of course, you mentioned him earlier. You remember Chris Pettit, who was our director of college scouting. A lot of fans want to get him out there.
Wasn't he
Mustang lover? Yeah, Mustang lover on Twitter, people claim. But there was a quote about him and his relation to Tim McDonald, and I think it reminded me of how troubling it is with having a guy like that in the front office, and how it kind of feels like what's going on with Joe Schoen a little bit. I'm going to read you this quote, but I'm going to replace Chris Pettit's name with Joe Schoen, and just tell me if this checks out to you. Everybody just did their job, didn't worry about it. One longtime scout, but when he got there, him being family, then that part of the office changed. I'm not blaming it on Tim, but it happened. And Chris and Joe Schoen, he immediately buddied up to him, because that's the kind of guy he is. It's not about how good of work he does or how competent of a scout he is. It's I'm going to save my job. As a coworker, he was fun. He was funny and cool. But the second Joe Schoen got the job, I mean the fucking second, he flipped. Just like that. It was unbelievable how all of a sudden he was God's gift to scouting immediately. You hated to look down at your phone and see it was him because he wanted to lecture you about something. Does that not sound exactly like that could be a quote about Joe Schoen?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, he's Joe Schoen is this guy. We should talk about him for a second too, just directly about him as a person. This guy is a nuclear waste survivor. I mean, I go back to the quotes. I want to pull it up from his press conference, Monty, about Jackson Dart. Do you remember his quote at the buy?
With saying like I was the first one to scout him. I scouted him before Brian Dable even knew who he was. That one, or
right? I want you to think about this for a second. The buy happened a couple of weeks after they fired Brian Dable, right? Brian Dable is supposedly his buddy, his friend that he brought with him from Buffalo. They used to famously go to Rangers games together. Brian Dable was an objectively bad head coach and got fired because he was a bad head coach. He deserved to be fired. But it was pretty well reported, and I think credibly, that Jackson Dart was Brian Dable's guy, right? That it was Brian Dable who was like, that's the guy I want. I want Jackson Dart. And even in that the clip from the draft, Joe Schoen goes out of his way before this, during the draft to say, this is your guy. You did the work. You guys did the research. You guys have the conviction of this guy. He's your guy, right? He goes out of his way to say that in front of ownership, in front of the cameras, all of this stuff, right? So I think it's fair to assume Jackson Dart was Brian Dable's guy.
Yeah, we've heard it.
Fast forward, and you saw like Brian Dable had a very unnatural, unhealthy, affection for Jackson Dart. I'm kind of happy for Dart that he's not exposed to that daily anymore. But that aside, he was in love with Dart. Fast forward, Dart, Dable's doing a terrible job as head coach. He gets rightfully fired. 2 weeks or so later, you're at the bye. You're at the bye presser. Joe Schoen's up there. Everybody in the Giants organization knows what happened. They know who wanted Dart. They know who Joe Schoen's preference was. May have been Shedeur Sanders. I don't know. I mean, whatever it was pretty clear that Jackson Dart was Brian Dable's guy. This is your friend. He just lost his job. He's looking for work right now. And what's it going to cost you? What does it hurt you as a person at that point as GM to stand up there and they ask about Dart to just say, Dable was big on Dart. Dable was a big reason we drafted Dart. It was his guy. We trusted his evaluation. He's great with quarterbacks. And, we're grateful that he liked him because we're happy we have Jackson in the building. He's a good young player. We're happy with him. We're grateful for that. And just say, obviously it didn't work out with Dable because, Dave's, whatever you want to call him, right? Because the results weren't there and the organization decided to move on. But what would it have hurt him to say that, right? It wouldn't have hurt him. It would have been the honorable thing to do. It would have been the honest thing to do. Just thank his friend for, hey, thanks for the quarterback, What did he say instead? No. It's not Dable who found Jackson Dart. I found Jackson Dart. My people at the Senior Bowl found Jackson Dart. We're the reason Jackson Dart's here. Make no mistake about it. I deserve credit for it. I mean, just think about that for a second, right? He gains nothing by saying that because everybody knows it's bullshit. And two, who gives a shit? You fucked up in a million other ways. You couldn't give that guy the one thing that he deserved to get, which is credit for Dart after he got fired. A lot of which is because you suck as GM. What does that tell you about the person he is? Right. And then, I mean, this thing I want to bring up, the Nick McLeod stuff, right? Like this is a man who told Nick McLeod's agent, tell your client not to pay this month's rent.
Because I'm not fucking around.
Because he won't take a pay cut that I can't force him to take.
Over like $1 million, not even like 800,000.
A guy who was starting for them, by the way, at that time, starting, not just on the roster, starting for them. And he's telling that Nick McLeod, didn't he just win an award for like, something in the wherever he is now? Like they gave him an award as like a person, or he did something for charity. I forgot what it was, but
I think it was just like an article written about him, about he was like going out and like giving out food in the streets and stuff like that, or
so
something
Nick
like
McLeod is obviously a good human being,
who the
right?
locker room really liked. That was why
Right,
it went over so bad.
right, and he treated him like that. The other player, we don't have to get into every single player, but we know that he's held grudges against Barkley. He held grudges against Love. I don't know about the McKinney thing, not sure, but he's acted like a jackass. He's not acted like an executive should. He's acted like a 5-year-old petulant moron with a grudge and an axe to grind every time he deals with a difficult situation. And he couldn't give his friend who just got fired even that little bit of credit for Jackson Dart. It bothered me a lot thinking about it. I'm like, he couldn't even do that. This is not someone I would want anywhere near my organization. I wouldn't want anybody like this working for me in any capacity. The faster I can get him out of there, the better. So that's the type of person he is, as far as we can tell.
He's a weasel. He's a weasel who'll do what it takes to keep his job. Dave Gettleman had a lot of that in him. Yeah, I mean, it's the Giants ownership has a type. I wanted a couple other quotes because it reminded me of what Giants ownership has looked for here and where their mistake has come. And just again, it makes sense they picked Joe Schoen. Here's a quote. One former front office member said, "There's a 0% chance the Giants are open to hiring a general manager who will genuinely fumigate the building." And we can see he did. Everyone says they want the truth. One former front officer said they don't want the truth. They want to hear what they want to hear. And that's something Joe Schoen is willing to give them. His office is right there in the center, the ex-scout said. Does he know what's going on 10 fucking feet away? Does he not know? I've always liked John. I have all the respect in the world for him. But that's what makes this hard. But some things need to be talked about. And last one here. Their solution forever has been hire a new coach. He'll solve all the ills. Sound familiar? But they didn't change anything else, said former member of coaching staff. They didn't change their personnel department. They didn't change how things are done. They didn't change any of that stuff. All this sounds, again, it's just fucking, it bums me out, man. Because I'm reading everything about this stuff directly translates to today.
It's just the same thing all over again. And it just flows from ownership. And that's why ultimately I feel like we're going to have this conversation over and over again until the ownership is changed. And I know that's a lot to ask, and it's not anything anybody here has any control over, but I feel like the writing's on the wall here. And I think we're going to get something like that in the near future, or maybe not so distant future. And that's when things will really change. Until then, I just don't want them to fuck up the Jackson Dart years. That's what it comes down to. Just don't fuck that up. Get a good coach in here and make some smart decisions in personnel management.
The one thing I'll say, I know a lot of people are out there aren't in love with the idea of Mike Tomlin or John Harbaugh or somebody like that. If you are going to find somebody who can deal with the Maras, it's going to be somebody like them. And I do think that there's a world that you can be a successful football team with the Maras meddling and doing what they do, because we've seen it. We've seen it with our fucking looking in the mirror, our better run organization with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I brought them up before. I mean, the Pittsburgh Steelers got their first GM, I think it was like 2009. Colbert was named a GM. And before that, the Steelers didn't have a single general manager in franchise history. They are just as meddling, if not worse than us. They are just successful. They are successful at it. They know they're better at hiring the right people, and the right people can allow the Rooneys to hold positions and player personnel and still be successful. That's not an easy thing to find, but they got it right, and they've continued to get it right. They've had like 3 coaches in the last like 40 years. They've gotten it right. If we can get it right with the great coach, I do think it changes a lot.
And that is where we're going to have to take our discussion going into the next few weeks. I think we've kind of discussed this in as much detail as we possibly can when it comes to the nepotism and where things are going. It's a little bit all over the place. We're usually a little bit more organized, but there's a lot of venting going on today.
Needs to happen.
Yeah, and I appreciate all of you guys for participating in it and sticking with us, because I think Giant fans kind of feel the same. They're sick of this shit. They just want to see the team win. We wouldn't care if they put a good product on the field, but the problem is that they don't put a good product on the field. They lose all fucking year, and the one time you want them to actually lose a game, they win the game. Like they do this shit to us constantly because they're a joke, and they celebrate that win like it matters. And I don't blame the players for celebrating. They want to win. I blame the organization for putting us in a situation where we actually have to feel bad when our team wins a game. You know, that is a shitty place to be as a fan. But again, we appreciate all of you guys. Before we let you go, I'm going to ask you guys one last time, please like the episode, subscribe. Please subscribe to He's a Giant on YouTube. We are close to 1,000 subscribers. If you can get us there, the algorithm takes off and we go to another level. So please subscribe while you're here. Just click that subscribe button, hit the like button, share it on YouTube, share it on Twitter, Facebook, whatever your preference is for social media. You can reach us at He's a Giant Pod. You can reach Monty at MONTECRI5TO. You can reach me at Queens_guy. But before we let you go, we got a playoff to talk about real quick coming up. And we're not going to end without that. We are a college football pod. So let's talk a little college football. Tomorrow, there's a bunch of bowl games tomorrow. I'm not going to go over them. But the granddaddy of New Year's Eve tomorrow night, 7:30 at night, the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic quarterfinal game of the national title playoff bracket. Number 10 Miami, which survived the ugliest football game I think I've ever seen against A&M last week, against number 2 Ohio State. That is tomorrow night. Who you got, Monty?
You got to go Ohio State, man. Talent wins out, I think. The one thing I will say, though, and I don't think it's going to play here, but as we discuss these games, do not underrate what happens with this bye week in college football. We saw last year every single team that had a bye lost. All 4 teams who had a bye lost. Keep that in mind.
Follow Giants Edge, by the way. He's a good guy.
Yeah, shout out Giants Edge.
Yeah. So that's tomorrow night. I'll leave that up there for a second. Friday night, we got the other 3 games. So the winner of the Ohio State-Miami game will play the winner of the All-State Sugar Bowl, which is number 6 Ole Miss versus number 3 Georgia. Who you got in that one?
Again, I'm gonna stick. I'm gonna stick with the team that got the bye. I don't trust Georgia without their coach. I mean, Ole Miss without their coach. Georgia's a really good team. I'm gonna go Georgia.
Yeah. So here's where I'm gonna go. I'm picking Ohio State to beat Miami. I think Ohio State is probably the best team in the country. At least on paper. I'm gonna pick an upset here. I really like the way Ole Miss is playing right now. I think they've been motivated by a lot of the stuff that's gone on with Lane Kiffin. Trinidad Chambliss, I think, is primed to actually show who he is and get ready for next year if he goes back. I'm going to pick Ohio State and Ole Miss in for those 2 games. Friday night, that game, by the way, is the 8 o'clock game. The earlier games at 12 o'clock on January 1st, the Capital One Orange Bowl, number 5 Oregon versus number 4 Texas Tech. This is a good one. Who do you have in this one?
I'm going Oregon. I do think the bye can play into this here. I think Dante Moore is ready to ball out, and I don't love the idea that we have to bank on another Oregon quarterback declaring for the Giants' future. But here we are, Dante Moore ball out, declare for the NFL draft, and
hopefully his brother is not an incoming freshman or anything like that.
Let's check on that.
At Oregon, yeah. We'll make sure Dante Moore has no family members who are enrolled for Oregon for next year. I do think Dante Moore is going to likely declare for the draft. I don't see why he wouldn't at this point. He's probably going to go 1 or 2 overall.
He might go 1 if he has a good one.
And we're going to do our QB episode in a couple of weeks, right? So we'll get there. We might do it next week. We'll see. But we'll see what plays out, right? We'll have to see what happens to the Giants. Yeah, but Oregon, I agree. I like Oregon in this game. Texas Tech has a crazy defense, though, dude. They have NFL studs on that D line.
That defense is ridiculous.
They have like 3 guys who are legitimate NFL players on that line right now.
And a great linebacker.
Don't be, yes, and a great linebacker who a lot of Giant fans are paying attention to. Do not be surprised if Texas Tech wins that game because their defense dominates. Okay, so just one to watch out for. And then the 4:00 game, the Rose Bowl, presented by Prudential, number 9 Alabama, who, as our friend Raekwon knows, doesn't belong here, but is here anyway. Is playing number 1 Indiana. This is actually a really interesting matchup. Who do you have in this one?
I'm gonna ride Indiana. I think Indiana has been the best team in the country. I think they're the best. They have the best coach in the country. But I do think this is a spot where you could potentially see an upset. I do think that when you get to the playoffs, a lot of times talent wins out over coaching. Just the talent kind of takes over at this point. And, I think that the bye is a factor. And I think if we can see good Ty Simpson, they can win this game.
Yeah. I think, and I may eat my words here. I think Indiana is going to put belt to ass Alabama in this game.
Right.
Alabama is an undisciplined team. Alabama has ups and downs. They have very erratic quarterback play. Their defense sometimes shows up, sometimes doesn't. There's a lot of inconsistency with that Alabama team. Indiana is the exact opposite. They are a well-oiled machine. They don't have the talent level, nowhere near it, that Alabama has. But that didn't stop them from beating Ohio State, which is a better football team than Alabama. I think, and remember, Curt Cignetti, he was the first coaching hire by why am I forgetting his name? Alabama coach.
By Nick Saban.
Nick Saban, excuse me. Yeah. I mean, Cignetti is a guy we've talked about potentially being a future Alabama coach if he wants to be, right? And if things work out that way. I think Cignetti would love nothing more than to put a beating on Alabama. And I think his team will come out well coached, well rested, ready to go. And they have all the opposite traits of Alabama. Their defense comes to play every single week. They're consistent. They don't make a lot of mistakes. Their quarterback is essentially Fernando Mendoza, for those who don't know, is probably going top 2 in this draft. He is a very consistent, largely error-free player. Right. This is a game that I can see them really taking off. And so I'm taking out Indiana in this game. So I have Indiana versus actually, you know what? I'm going to take Texas Tech in this game, Monty. So I'm going to go Indiana, Texas Tech, and I have Ole Miss versus Ohio State. And you have Georgia, Ohio State, and Oregon, Alabama. Or are you taking Indiana?
Taking Indiana.
Okay. Fun couple of days coming up of college football. A lot of fun for us. And that's it. The Giants play on Sunday. I believe they're in the 1:00 game. They should be no later than that against the Cowboys. If the Giants lose this game to the Cowboys, they will fall no further than the 2nd overall pick. They could still get the 1st overall pick if, and I wish I could put it up, Doug Analytics put up the tweet, if the Giants lose and the Raiders beat the Chiefs and 2 other things happen.
Yeah, there's 2 or 4 games. I'm blanking on them, but there was 2
right.
or 4.
I think there's 2. I forgot the games, but they're all very probable kind of outcomes. By the way, I looked at them. In fact, if you give me a second, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, I was about to do the same. All right, I got it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the 4 games we need to win. At least two of these need to go our way. Seattle beats San Francisco, very possible. Cleveland beats Cincinnati, possible but less likely. Atlanta beats New Orleans, possible. Chicago beats Detroit. Detroit's playing awful right now, very possible.
Right. So if again the scenario is the Giants lose, the Raiders win against the Chiefs, who are playing with nobody also. So you don't know who's going to win that game.
Yeah.
In that scenario, if 2 of those things happen, in addition to that, the Giants get the number 1 overall pick. If 2 of those things don't happen, but the Giants lose their game anyway, it doesn't matter what the Raiders do, they get the number 2 overall pick. So if the Giants lose, they have the number 2 overall pick. And if Dante Moore does declare, which we think he will, almost mitigates winning this game this weekend. But again, the Giants have to lose to the Cowboys for this to be the case. If the Giants figure out a way to beat the Cowboys somehow, you don't know how the Cowboys are going to play this game. We know Dak's going to start. We don't know how long he's going to play. They put Joe Milton in and he shits the bed. There's a chance we beat him. Then the Giants could fall as low as pick number 7. in the upcoming draft, and that
and
depends
could be as
on,
high as 2 still.
right. Could still be 2, but
They would need everybody to
go to
win.
7. Right. For the Giants to still get the second pick, if they win, the only way they're getting the second pick is if Cleveland wins their game, Tennessee wins their game, Arizona wins their game, the Jets win their game, and Washington wins their game. That's the only way the Giants are picking it too. Every loss from one of those teams drops the Giants down a pick. It's literally numerical. One other team, one of those 5 teams loses a game and the Giants win, the Giants fall to 3. If 2 of them win a game, if 2 of them lose a game, if 2 of them win a game, the Giants, if 2 of them lose, then the Giants fall to pick 4, and so on and so forth, all the way down to pick 7. So, Doug Analytics, follow him. If you don't follow him on Twitter, he's got great stuff. Really one of the best follows on this app, and he does a great job.
He's usually great job. He's been on a run recently.
Right. And so he has this really nicely laid out on on a nice little table algorithm. Bottom line is, if the Giants lose, they're locked into 1 or 2. If they don't lose, did you get up there? Okay. If they don't lose, then there's a bunch of shit that can happen, dropping from 2 to 7. I think that's it. 1 hour and 50 minutes of venting and going over a bunch of stuff. Once again, we appreciate you guys. Any other closing thoughts?
No, man. Just lose this week, man. Fire Joe Schoen, lose. Bench our starter. Hey, there he is.
Doug, there he is. It's at Doug_analytics, everybody. I'll leave it up there. Please give him a follow. One of the best follows on Twitter, period. There are a few guys, and we're going to have to shout out, NYG fan in Charlotte, Research Rick. There are a lot of guys who are awesome, who are great follows, who add a much higher level of understanding and thought-provoking things to this whole discussion. So we appreciate them. Thank you guys for being here. Again, we're going to try to make it next week. We'll be here next week. I don't know in what capacity. So again, if the way I feel, Monty, if they just bring Joe Schoen back and it's just bullshit.
Discussion.
Yeah, and we've had the discussion. We might just be doing the QB episode and talk a little bit about it. If they fire him, we might have some fireworks to discuss. We'll leave it at that. Tune in next week.
We'll hear more about next Wednesday.
Yeah, we're probably back at our regular time next Wednesday, but we'll let you guys know. Once again, thank you guys, and go Giants.
Go Giants lose. All right.
Go Future. All right, guys. Thank you guys.
Have a good night.
Happy